Welcome to Season 12 of the Social Work Rants podcast, providing an inside look of the social work mental health profession. Social work being political, the struggles of social work entrepreneurship, the intersectionality of mental health and finances as it relates to social work and society as a whole. Let's get it. Hope you enjoy. Hey, what's going on, social workers, mental health professionals, and change agents? Welcome to another episode of the Social Work Rants podcast. I'm your host, Marinez. Saludos a todos. Greetings, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, tapping in wherever you are watching or listening to this podcast. I appreciate all the love support. Gracias a todos por su apoyo. Continue to follow the podcast on Instagram at the Social Work Rants podcast. That is on one word. If you rather watch the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the red subscribe button, hit the like on the videos for my audio listeners throughout the world. Make sure you like, share, download episodes, and share episodes, and rate the podcast 5 stars. My guests at this time, if you're a long time listener of the podcast, you know I like to talk about housing. It's a great way for social workers to. There's plenty of jobs, especially in New York City, in terms of housing, whether it be scatter site housing, different populations from DV to HIV, like you name it. The the gauntlet is out there in terms of working, and my friend Rosita doing great things in New York City, and Shams, who's a great advocate in terms of housing in New York City and New York State. We came on the podcast over a year or so ago, and we're back on again. This time, talk first housing conversation under the Mayor Mandami era. So the previous episodes have been under Eric Adams and Mayor Adams, who I miss a little bit. I miss his little shenanigans already. But we got to throw that in there. So welcome you guys back. How you guys doing?
Thank you for having us, Baz. Glad to be back at your podcast. I think this is not that I think this is number 7, but the first one of 2026 under the Mandami administration. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. I mean, I'm glad to always be here, especially with Shams and yourself, to talk about the housing crisis in New York City, what's being done, what's not being done. So glad to be here, part of this conversation with both of you.
Yeah, I'm doing good. Every what they say, every day above ground is a great day. So
That's a
I
fact.
can't complain. And I think we should mention also that it's 100 days in with a new administration. Today marks that 100th day, which is a great thing to like kind of center. But I also will say that within the past 2 weeks, I've lost some vital people to my journey. I just got to center that also. So I'm a hip hop pioneer, hope develop hip hop culture from the early days. And a few weeks ago, we lost JDL from the Cold Crush Brothers, who is one of the people who sort of inspired me to actually do the work that I'm doing. The both of us were homeless during the pandemic. Me at the Lucerne Hotel, him sleeping on a park bench. And the
Mm,
fact that we're impactful in the development of this multi-billion-dollar culture, but we found ourselves homeless was like something that I I just couldn't not address. And
mm,
so inspired by the fact, I mean, if it was just me, I probably would have never went public as a homeless hero. But after realizing that my brother was also homeless, I decided that I would, put my ego to the side. I didn't care about the reputation, and I would express myself publicly, and that kind of sparked it. Well, we lost him a week ago, and just yesterday, the news came that another impactful person, Africa Bambaataa, who was also a mentor and like a family member to me, we lost him yesterday, and
mm,
um, I have a book coming out called The Art of Rising and Thriving, but it's somewhat patterned after The Art of War. And Africa Bambaataa is one of the people who actually gave me that book years ago and stuff.
Mm,
How, it's consciousness, but also it's where a lot of my foundation in hip hop culture comes from, during the early days of hip hop and stuff. So I say that because it's integral to a lot of stuff I do, which I don't, people don't know this, but I fuse the experience of growing up in the South Bronx and Harlem and stuff like that and being a part of hip hop culture. I utilize a lot of that in order to affect change, in order to take something that appears to be nothing and turn it into something and be able to mobilize and move and stuff like that. So I just wanted to mention those things as well before we get started. But I'm
no,
because we still here, we still got a mission, we still got things to do.
no, absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that, and rest in peace to both legends of hip hop. Because I'm a hip hop head myself. Growing up in the Bronx in the '90s, and still listen to '90s hip hop currently in 2026. So you see me on the highways of Delaware, I'll be definitely bumping the '90s hip hop
Mhm.
all day, every day. So thank you for that. And I'm
Can
glad.
I I'm sorry, before can I also, I don't mean to interject that Mr. Fred Shack recently passed away over the weekend. Fred Shack was the CEO, the former CEO of Urban Pathways. He recently retired in February. He was a social worker for over 50 years. He's done a lot of work in terms of ending homelessness, in addition to being a social worker of boots on the ground. He will be forever remembered. He left a long legacy for all of us, and that will continue to live.
Yeah, thank you, Rosita. I was remiss.
Yeah,
Appreciate you
yeah.
lifting him up as well. Also inspiring and impactful
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
my journey as well. Thank you.
No, yeah, absolutely. Rest in peace to him as well. Um, Obviously, I'm biased. Being from New York, New York makes the world go around, and talking about housing. You know, I've done this scatter site housing, HIV. That is a lot that continues to happen, and a lot that has you guys both know that's never been addressed. Even like I feel like to this day, like Hurricane, Sandy, like there's still like housing issues regarding Sandy still affecting stuff today in terms of people that's never been really been addressed. So it's like um we could talk about housing for hours. Right? Hence, we have had many conversations on housing on the podcast. So, that being said, we're talking about homelessness in New York today. What are we describing? Right now. I know there's been a lot of stuff in terms of obviously there's a supposed budget crisis in New York City that Mayor Mondami is now addressing. That supposedly the previous mayor left. So what is exactly happening in terms of homelessness in New York City? Whoever wants to go first.
Well, I'll go first.
Yeah.
So one, I want to center that I think let's deal with the budget stuff. When we're discussing the budget crisis, we have to consider that there are several things that happen that affect the difference in the budget. During the Adams administration, we were all coming out of the pandemic, which there were pandemic relief money that we were establishing our budget with those considerations. But at a certain point, we knew that that money would not be there anymore. So there was a focus in the original administration on tightening up some things so that we can create a rainy day fund so that if another pandemic or crisis happens, we'd be able to deal with that. But there was, and we all understand that there's big bureaucracy in the city and how the city runs things. And in a lot of cases, especially in the nonprofit sector, because look at exactly where we're having to put a lot of money into, many have operated with blank checks, so to speak. Many have a lot of money has gone to issues that have not addressed the problems, that have not solved the problems. So it's like money on top of money, money on top of money, but you're not solving the problem. The problem is increasing. So trying to reverse that requires is going to be some discomfort. That was what was experienced in the first administration. And even as we set in place things to do, guess what? We had another crisis, the
Mm,
migrant crisis. And because
mm,
I work closely with that administration, I kind of understand it in different ways and provided guidance to the previous administration and directly to the mayor to help address those things. But one of the things I can tell you is that he honestly thought that the federal government would come in and help alleviate the financial strain of being able to address the migrant crisis in a way that did not negatively impact our brothers and sisters that came into the country. And
mm,
that relief never came significantly to address that. So that meant it still has to get paid for. So when we're looking now and trying to rebudget, we're dealing with a situation where money was spent in a number of ways, right? And that does leave a issue of how does this get paid? And if you're an incoming mayor that says, "Well, look, I have ideas; these ideas cost, but that means this budget is going to come to a different amount." Remember, we had a $117 billion budget. Now we're looking at trying to do $127 billion budget, right? So the question is, where does the money come from? And that's where we have in these different budget things. So and I end by saying, so we have to put it all in a proper context and understand the challenges moving forward, because it's not a question of, well, someone just left it like that. The
Yeah.
budgets
mm,
are approved between the mayor and the
Mhm.
city council, and you also have the comptroller rolling in, so weighing in. So all these different entities are familiar with the challenges and stuff like that, and there should be certain checks and balances. Not always the case, but at the same time, if your agenda says we want to finance this different push, and that costs money up to, I think they're estimating $10 billion, that's more money than the original budget was for
mm,
the previous year. And there's always going to be that question, well, how do you fund it? And so the only contention I'll end with this is that I still maintain, as I did with the Adams administration, our first sit down and meeting actually discussed the fact that I took issue with a lot of money that goes into the nonprofit sector but does not solve the problem. The other thing I took issue with, a lot of the money that goes into the nonprofit sector go to entities that are
Mhm.
controlled by people who are so far removed from the issues, meaning they're not the minorities who we sort of
mm,
like are the ones that are impacted the most, but there's no equity there, so it's like that was another issue that I said we should address that. Like, if we're going to be, as the city, allocating funds towards entities to solve issues like homelessness, housing, etc. And we're the ones on the lowest part of the totem pole. We're the ones that need the help the most. There are entities or people involved in these sectors that do not have access to city funds and not are supported. And it's the same players that are just getting these blank checks. You need to investigate that and then start to level that playing field, so these entities who are closer in proximity to the issues are able to address the issues, because a lot of times we're the ones on the front lines who are not being who do not have the actual support that we should have. So that was another major push with the previous administration, which is not an easy thing to overcome when you got decades of
mm,
of the city working in a way that puts a band-aid on a problem, creates an ecosystem that enriches some people, but it keeps us in this perpetual cycle of poverty and dependence. And so you see, you got a prison industrial complex, and you look
Mhm.
at the population there, 90% black and brown, right? And then you go into the homeless sector and you say you look at the percentage there, 90% in the shelter industrial complex, black and brown. And then you
mhm,
see an exodus of that same population leaving our city and the others look at the so-called gentrification in our particular communities, you're seeing a whole shift in that. But guess who's being hoarded into these shelters? Black and brown. So it's like there's something wrong with that I think needed to be addressed in the first administration, in the previous administration, and that I think should be addressed in this current administration. Sorry for being long winded, but I had to get that out my system.
No,
No,
no, this is
that
good.
was a great
Yeah.
perspective, especially since you had some
Yeah.
inside work, working with 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 Mayor Adams, before it, and get that background of okay, what happened, and mentioning the migrants, because that was a big thing too, and obviously that cost a lot of money as well, and that's still a bit of an issue as well on top of everything else.
Yeah. And like Shams, you said it perfectly because we really got to see at the whole entire picture or scope is that the prior administration was coming, we have COVID going on from 2020 to what, 2022-ish, going, you're right, 22-ish, to then, the prior mayor coming in, Eric, and having to deal with all of COVID, not only at a city level, but also at a state level with the former governor, Cuomo and everything. And so then we had the migrants that started roughly around 2021 going into 2022, and it was an influx. And, we all thought, hey, is the federal government going to intervene? That never happened. To then, come up with a plan, a crisis plan to resolve that situation, which really never was resolved, right? And so you're throwing millions and millions of dollars, and like, where is the money going, right? Because now everyone's saying, well, we have all these $1 trillion, negative balances in terms of the budget. But like you said, Shams, all this is approved prior to any new fiscal year coming in. Working in a nonprofit, like now is budget season, right? Everybody's doing their budgets because by July 1st, right, you have the new budget, which already has been approved at city or state level. The federal government has different time frames depending on the contract, so that varies slightly. But when it comes to the state and the city contracts, those are on a clockwise, schedule. With that being said, is that I don't consider that there is a lack of money or resources. There's a lack of really understanding to resolve the root cause of homelessness, more than anything else. I mean, New York City is the biggest city in this country or even in the world and has all these resources, but are being allocated in ways that are not really resolving the issue. For example, $80,000 per year was invested in only trying to provide services to try to house people who were chronically homeless on New York City streets and still don't have a home. $80,000 and still living still living on the streets, right? So you times that $80,000 times three, times four, times five, you could buy a house with that total amount of $200,000 or $300,000 just to try to house people and to go into the shelters, not to house them, just to try to connect them to the shelters, right, Sham? And never get that level, not never to get home. With that being said, it's really more about where are we investing the money? Who are they giving the money to? What are the outcomes and putting pressure in terms of those areas, right? And seeing the real results other than saying, oh, we're investing $100 million to end homelessness, which was the campaign of Bloomberg, right? Years ago, by I don't know what year he said. We have that's been like 15, 20 years ago, and still the issue remains the same.
Mm-hmm.
So with that being said, it's like you have the city, then you have the nonprofits and providers, then you have, let's talk about the landlords, right? Let's talk about, all these, city Phelps vouchers and everything that comes with it, which people are getting the vouchers, but now they can't even use the vouchers because they have expired their time because landlords don't want to take the vouchers. So there's a lot of things that simultaneously become more complex to the situation that people are really not understanding other than just taking taxpayers' dollar because we all put into it and just giving it away without having a real concrete solutions with outcomes and pointing the finger, oh, the past administration, the government, and everything that comes with it. It's really brainstorming of having a blueprint in terms of addressing, homelessness, or better yet, now more people who are working class, working 3, 4 jobs and living in a shelter of affordability. So it's a lot. I said a lot there, but the reality
Hmm.
is that we have the resources. New York City has the resources. What are they doing with it?
Yeah, before you go to your next question, you did a good framing by saying, speaking to the $80,000 spent per person. And I sort of simplify it sometimes by saying, I think the numbers are like $4,800 per month for a person to sit on a cot in a shelter, lay on a cot in a shelter that comprises 200 people. Most of the shelters that they try to build or have built are trying to max out at those high population levels. So just think of what the voucher comes down the line for that person. That voucher for that person might be either 1,700, might have went up a little bit more to no more than a little over 2,000 if I'm correct. And that, so you say, wait, you when we ask for more money on the voucher, that's like a hard fight, right?
Hmm.
So you're not going to get that money on the voucher, but you're still paying. So listen, we're talking about where's the money? Is there money? But you're paying $4,800 for the person to sleep on a cot surrounded in a building with 200 people. Something's wrong with that, and that's taxpayers' money. And these are
Hmm.
codified or not codified, but these are policy decisions. This is not like we got a crisis is bad. This is like you created this crisis and you're not doing the things. And I'm not saying this administration or the previous. This
Hmm.
has been the case.
Yeah.
This is the way the city operates. My objective was really to kind of shift that. And part of what I understood, not like I'm the super expert and I just know these things, but I realized that wait, if I'm trying to solve this, building a better shelter is not necessarily the solution. Although I would love to see, and I do see better shelters being built now, right? But the real solution is building housing. So if you look at my particular trajectory, it has been gone, it has shifted from just being an advocate or just speaking to the homelessness situation to speaking towards housing as that being the actual solution to solve homelessness. And part of that has to do with also bringing property owners and landlords into the space and finding out why don't you accept the voucher. They will point back to the work advantage program. Shams, we did it before, but the city stopped the funding and we were stuck with tenants that couldn't pay the rent. There were other factors other than them just saying, I don't want formerly homeless people in my building. When we put more money on the voucher through Intro 146, how I know is many of these property owners came to me and said, "How can I get the voucher?" Because they wanted the money. They wanted now that the voucher
Right.
would
It's
actually
guaranteed money for them.
at a better rate. But they also had an ask, and their ask is, "Could you help us guide the city on certain issues that we have and certain things that affect us, right? What are those issues? Those issues are repairs. We need help with repairs, right? Some of them might got 2 or 3 buildings and they just don't bring in enough income to do the repairs. Some of them said, could they get um, voucher holders into our units quicker? If we approve of the voucher holder and it takes the city 6 months in order to get the person in, 4 months to get the person in, we've lost all of that money. And at the same time, even though they forward money, it's sort of not, it doesn't even pencil out at this point. So it's like, if we can get them to streamline their processes and make it easier to get the person we approve into the unit. So these are other challenges that they I brought it to the conversation. And what I did to be proactive and not reactive is I formed a group called Landlords Who Care that represented more than 200,000 units of housing throughout the city, who said, listen, we will work with the city and we will try to work with you all to try and accept the vouchers and stuff like that, which that fight was although we did that and we've made some progress, I learned that it's not as simple as I thought it would be, because we have such a division between, in these spaces, between property owners, tenants' rights advocates, and impacted people. And the goal for me, then and now, it remains, is to sort of bring everybody into the same space.
Gotcha. Now, since we on the topic of shelter and the shelter system, is the shelter system functioning as a temporary bridge, or is it becoming a long-term housing solution?
I'll give you that answer. And Shams, jump in. It has become, unfortunately, the reality of the situation is that it has become the long stayer or kind of permanent in terms of I don't want to even call it home, a place to stay. I don't, and that's the reality because I'm a social worker by trade, and I have up until most recently interviewed individuals with a 20, it's a whole process. You need a 2010E, you need to qualify
Mm,
for a certain level of housing, whether you're POP A, B, all these, criteria that you have to meet in order to be in supportive housing is that I've encountered individuals and also unfortunately families 3 and 4 and 5 years in the shelter. The medium average stay 8 years moving around. They go on interviews, right? They get rejected, or their credit isn't up to standard, or they have a legal case going on, right? And so people are staying longer in shelters, whether trying to get into supportive housing or trying to get into affordable housing, because there's a difference. Affordable housing is for individuals who are unstably housed or, can't afford the $5,000 and $10,000 rent in New York City. That's affordable housing. You're giving, it's based on the income. It's about affordability. They do the 80/20 rule and everything that comes with that. And their LIHTC buildings. And Shams could talk more about that because he's now in the real estate development area. And then the supportive housing component, whether it's in a building or in scatter site, is more for individuals who need more support based on a disability, whether it's mental health, whether it's, a health
Physical.
condition like HIV, or, someone that may have a domestic violence situation. So that's different there than affordable housing. People sometimes get that confused, and I just want to give clarification. It's two different types of housing with several different type of requirements. But is it much needed? Absolutely. With that being said, is that the unfortunate reality is that more individuals and more families are staying longer in the shelter. And that doesn't resolve the problem. It continues the whole systematic oppression of, like Shams had mentioned, of us people of color and recycling us through those systems. And so I see children being born and raised in shelters or going to school and not going to their home, going to a shelter. And the unfortunate reality has become like a norm when that should not be a norm at all. So, Shams, you could jump into and talk a little bit more about, like, the whole thing with affordable housing and if people are staying and living more in shelters, because as a social worker, being in that area, I see it more and more. And not really having, making this like a norm when it's not a norm for a child to, have lived or grow up in the shelter system and families being there for years.
So, so I'll say this. So, if you look at the work that we did with the previous administration, coming in, I knew one thing. I knew a number of things. One of the things I understood was that the city, um, they themselves are not going to understand how to really solve the problems. And some of the issues that we've had in, say, the de Blasio and previous administrations prior to his administration, was that they had no real connection, or they didn't engage people with lived experience as much as they should have, right? And there's a disconnect to all of the different variant advocacy organizations that are out there. And I don't like to act like I'm some super expert, but it was clear to me when I was fighting against the city during the Lucerne and stuff like that. and a lot of people were coming to try and support us. That when I looked at what they were doing, they all were trying to do some good works, but they weren't working together. And then there was we didn't see a unified focus on these issues with the city council, with legislators as a collective body. So I was like, there's a lot of issues that come because people are not on the same page. And so my attempts early on was to try and bridge those gaps. With the Adams administration, one of the first things I did was said, I'm not a magical Negro, and I'm nobody's puppet, right? And I ain't gonna be no token. What I did was I brought over 50 formerly homeless and homeless people of varying of issues into City Hall to help guide the administration on how to address housing and homelessness. And one of the things that I did was, with the support of the mayor, the chief housing officer at the time, Jessica Katz, DSS Commissioner Jerry Jenkins, and the previous and the following commissioners and deputy mayors. One of the things that we did, we formed a group called that became called Impact the Advocates, that meets once a month with the administration. I've got them. Why is this important, right? Because out of that group came something called the Blueprint for Housing and Homelessness that the city did under the direction of Jessica Katz. And so why was that important? Because it's one of the first times that housing and homelessness got centered in the same conversation, right? And as of someone who served on Adam's transition team, that was one of the biggest pushes. I said, do not separate the issue of housing and homelessness. If you're going to
Mhm.
talk about homelessness, you got to talk about housing. And if you talk about housing, you better be talking about homelessness, right? And so those things worked for us. And here's what I want to center, Rosita. If you look at the numbers, the data, the data shows that in that administration, record numbers of people exiting shelter in a quick amount of time into permanent housing. The
Mm.
data shows record number of street homeless people coming off the streets, going into safe havens, stabilization bed shelters, and ultimately in housing than any previous administration. But that was also supported through record numbers of investment into vouchers at the time, safe haven beds. One of the things that I guess I'm credited with is convincing the mayor to focus more on safe havens as an alternative to the street homeless population. I helped devise what they call a subway safety plan, but I knew that one of the reasons why we have such a high street homelessness uh, population is people don't want to go into the traditional shelters. Me being someone that had the same experience, and the popular uh, 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 media push or just general push is that people are in the streets because they're mentally ill, because they're on substances. But in reality, there's a lot of people who consciously choose to go there because the alternative of being in one of these dangerous shelters, it just shows you that is so dangerous that I'd rather risk the danger of the streets than to go into one of those. And so, you know, the fact of being able to look at, the administration went, we did the subway safety plan, and I said that people are not going to go into them shelters. They didn't. But I had a real conversation with the mayor, and a day later, or 2 days later, we're announcing $171 million investment into what we all know as a better alternative for many of the street homeless population, which is safe haven. So this I want to center that because I do want to also acknowledge that record achievement have been made in the previous administration, and the one of the driving factors, not just my participation and engagement with the administration, I will take a little credit, but also the engagement and participation in various stakeholders, including other impacted people who met each month with everyone from the mayor, the deputy mayor, and the commissioners on down in every relevant agency to help guide them and give them some real life perspective on some of the nuances that are missed if you didn't have the experience. So, and that's it. I'll end with this. Important thing to consider. So, exits, right, out of shelters into housing. The city had a policy called the 90-day rule, right, which meant that when you go in, you have to wait 90 days before they even begin processing you for City FEPS 2010E or any of the other relevant vouchers, right? So everyone who's been through the experience is like, why am I waiting 90 days, right? And and it was just a waste of money. Remember, if it was me, I'm on the cat on that cot for $4,300 a month. That's 90. You know, that's a lot of money just to be sitting there. Why? Right?
Yeah.
So one of the fiercest advocates for it was impacted person named Sarah Wilson. And in every meeting, everywhere she went, she's like, eliminate the 90-day rule. I kind of overlooked it, even though I experienced it. But it became one of the major things that we were able to do. And unfortunately, when through executive order, Mayor Adams eliminated the 90-day rule, it was supposed to be Sarah Wilson's stage to actually, speak to it and stuff like that. And unfortunately, it's a little emotional talking about it, but we didn't know it then. I was looking for her to be at City Hall, but we didn't know that she actually she was deceased at the time and didn't get to actually get her pen for that being signed into law, but also to get the recognition that she deserved for really being the person to actually push that. And so it's things like that that helped change the dynamic of people being able to move out of shelter quicker. Now, why does that not exist today? Or, well, let's not say why does it not exist. Let's just say that those challenges still remain, or they may have gotten a little worse. May have shifted, right? So there are other challenges which had to be brought into the conversation, right? There's not enough housing, right? And some would argue that, well, you have NYCHA units that are not open, legitimate argument. You have property owners who are warehousing apartments and not allowing voucher holders into it, legitimate argument. You have supportive housing that have empty units that are people not transitioning into in a quicker thing. Now, no one wants to talk about these so much unless you're talking about them property owners, but everybody sort of is complicit in the inability to get people out of shelter into housing. And we're never going to solve the issues if we don't have the real conversation. But that real conversation ends up going right back to the city's bureaucracy, right?
Mhm.
So you have new developments that come online, and I've had developments that have market rate and affordable housing. The market rates gets filled up quickly. The affordable housing, it takes months and months to fill those units. So you say, wait, hold up. It's 100,000 people that are homeless. It's probably whatever 10,000 people with vouchers. Why don't you just get them in and get them out the shelter? We'll save money and we'll be able to reallocate those funds towards solving some other solutions, right? Like building housing. So there was a lot of challenges. Those challenges remain and have to be looked at, right? But another challenge has been, which we work to address. Think about it, because look, while we have the conversation, we also have to acknowledge the work that's been done, because it's easy to say Mayor Adams did this, it was so bad and this and that, but that sort of one doesn't acknowledge the achievements that we made. That's number one. But the other side of that, right? Because that's political stuff. But the other
Mhm.
side is not acknowledge all the hard work that people like Maria Torres Springer did, that Ann William Isom did, that Adolfo Carrion did, that Ahmed Tijani did. Like all of these great people, Layla still with the new administration. Like all of these people have been super actively engaged in shifting this in a way that has produced positive results. So let me case in point, right? remember we said there wasn't a focus in previous administrations on housing and homelessness in the same conversation. So you saw a lot of people being warehoused for years upon years, right? Those numbers changed, but we had to also address the elephant in the room. What was that? The racist zoning laws that have been on the books for over 60 years, right? So now think about what we did. We sat down, right? And we said, those are, they would say exclusionary zoning laws. I say racist zoning laws, right?
Mhm.
Let's call it
Let's
what
call
it is.
it is, right?
Yeah.
So what that meant was we are now building housing in the same place, right? You got something like 421A giving people incentives. And when they looking at where it's easier to build, where the space is, where they're going to get the subsidies and stuff, it ends up being in our community. But at 80% market rate and 20%, affordable, that you have to question affordable to whom. And
Mm,
you have to say, wait, I gotta actually go through a lottery, which I have more chance of winning the other lottery than
mm,
it is for me to get into this lottery and get an apartment.
exactly.
We're not gonna produce housing. We're not gonna solve it like that. So we said we have to open up this city towards development. And part of that, or integral to that, was the City of Yes initiative that we did. And then beyond that, because um if you have local elected officials in certain places who say, well, it's member deference, so I'm gonna use that to say y'all ain't building it, no, we ain't doing it, then that stops the building, right? Because member deference, the unofficial thing that everybody went by through in the council, and that can stunt development. So beyond that, we had the Charter Revision Commission, which I served as one of the commissioners on, that specifically addressed those things to help with our City of Yes initiative and stuff like that. So I want to acknowledge that there's a tremendous a lot of amount of things that happen, and the current mayor, fortunately, he also voted in the City of Yes proposals, which should be highlighted. He came in with a serious focus on housing. He retained Layla, who is now deputy mayor over housing and planning, and there are others that are still functioning in the agencies that are able to build on the foundation that was laid and stuff like that. Now, where you're going to see challenge to look at the numbers, keep in mind that we had a migrant crisis where we had, I believe, nearly 200,000 people coming to the city. And while half may have left, we still have half that needs help, right? So when you see the population of shelter, you have to understand that that high number is not reflective of all like long-term New Yorkers. It's also reflective of our migrant brothers and sisters who are now being placed out of hotels, transferred out of hotels into our shelter system. They still need housing, right? So the number is high, but we still have the other elephant in the room, which is the housing crisis. And here's where it gets a little more difficult. If federally, statewide, you don't have the funding coming in through HUD to actually help build the
Mm,
housing or repair and maintain the housing that's in stock, we're going to be stagnated. It's going to, well, it's not that it's going to be stagnated, but it's going to take a little longer to reduce that population. So the last thing is, think of this. We also had, when you see numbers increase, the lifting of the eviction moratorium. We also were operating at deficits in city agencies, including lawyers in the court system, right? That can help prevent eviction. So those things have to be addressed as well. And then prevention measures, whether it's getting the vouchers for people before they enter a shelter, whether it's, ensuring that, property owners are fixing it. So the conversation gets a lot of, it gets complex, and it sounds like it goes all over the place, but in reality it doesn't. in reality, we have to involve all of these different things in order to start to get to real solutions. And I think when we're looking at the budget, it does take a review of, where does the money go? Like, does it make sense to build another shelter at a place where housing could be, knowing that the shelter is costing us for that person to be there, for a single person, $4,800? It could go to $10,000 for a family per month. Like, that is money that is there that will be paid. Does that make sense? Is that solving the problem? Or should we build the housing and perhaps allow them to have a voucher that helps them transition, or helps them to permanency in their housing?
No, yeah. I mean, for me, it makes fiscally more sense. Just give them the voucher and just pay for it, and they have permanent housing. Just you get a voucher every month. It's guaranteed money for the property manager to get it, and then whatever is left over, that's up to the person to pay it. That's usually a work program is like 30% of a person's income, whatever that income is. So it's like minuscule compared to up to $10,000 living in a shelter. So it's
But
fiscally it makes sense to do that.
so I'm wrestling with the thought that is there a racial component to this?
Mm.
Sorry, but the population is the same.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it's not that housing doesn't get developed,
yeah.
right? Housing goes up all across the city, but
Hmm.
it's not affordable to the long-term Black and brown people that been here, or even the many of our brothers and sisters that just came into the city. It's still not affordable, right?
Mhm.
And so you say, so I go to certain communities like Harlem, etc., right? And I'm like, it's not that the building's not going up, but we can't live in that building. The
Yeah.
Hmm.
alternative for us is the shelter that they built somewhere on the outskirts, around the corner, or maybe down the block from the building. And I'm
Yeah.
like, why is the shelter the option for me? So you hear the talk. So what people are not understanding is the income level of the so-called working class, right? You think the working class actually could afford that, even the new building, right? First of all, understand that working class city worker does not, in most cases, qualify for a voucher. So you
Hmm.
ain't getting the 20%, right? And they can't afford the market rate.
Mhm.
So now the so-called working class is not even able to stay in the city. And it's not just that they're working class like a just blanket word. This is our social workers. This
Mhm.
is our city workers, our HRA workers. This is our school teachers. This is our law enforcement people. These are our correctional officers. These are like people
Some
that
MTA workers.
Yeah.
MTA workers.
Mhm.
They are finding it unaffordable to live in the very city. So we end up losing a tax base, right? Because they pay taxes. We end up losing vital people who provide services, and then, like, we become devoid of those services. So we end up seeing other issues, whether it becomes homelessness, whether it becomes crimes of poverty, et cetera, et cetera. We don't produce a good city and environments when we're not really working to solve the problems, and just bunching people up in shelters at this huge expense is not the answer. We have to have better ways to say, even if it's a 5 year or 10 year plan. Cause I don't think, I used to say we could do it in a day. Now from working from the inside, I see that's just not gonna happen, right? But if we have to commit ourselves to say that, I know these are Black and brown people, and I may not be Black or brown, so it may not really be my issue, or I may not come from where they come from because I have a certain level of privilege. And hey, they should just lift themselves up from their bootstraps. And I don't know what that means, because many of us didn't even come into this world with boots. We don't even what bootstraps. I came. I'm barefoot. Like, I don't even have a starting chance, right? And for some of us, they ain't never give us no reparations, so that's not a part of the conversation. So it's like, if you really care, right? and I deal with a lot of people that are of privilege that do have money, and they thankfully they trust my conversations, and I trust being able to engage, right? But when I tell them this is your issue too, they're like, "Well, I don't understand," and I say, "Yes, because it's your taxes that's paying for this. You don't have to care, but
Yeah.
care about your money." When you're sitting here, you're complaining because you see a homeless encampment in front of your nice building. Understand, when I was homeless in the streets, I was not trying to stay in the South Bronx neighborhood I grew up in because I don't want to get shot by a stray bullet, right? So I'm going downtown to a nice little place where these people, all they doing is walking their dogs and they don't care about me, right? And I know the police can't make me move because I'm not causing a nuisance. It's safer, right? So I say to them, look, if you want to help eliminate that, then you got to pressure your elected officials to put the money in the right place. Because right now, if you look at why people are being warehoused, why we can't solve this problem, is because a lot of the money that is out there is being placed in the wrong places, and it creates an ecosystem that if I'm a nonprofit provider that's making $500,000 a year for a salary, I damn sure don't want you to put me out of a job because look, I'm helping address the issue, but
Oh
you
my
know
God.
I got kids that gotta go to college. And I like to take my weekends trips to not the Poconos. We go to the Poconos, to the Hamptons. You know what I mean? And I'm trying to visit every country in the world. So you can't stop that. Like it's a problem. I got a policy report to show it's a problem. And at the end of the year, since it's so much, because we got 10 more shelters that we are overseeing, I want another $100,000 bonus. And yes, I'm glad to be helping these poor black and brown souls. Hey, okay, this is a social. I'm sorry, I'm going too
No,
far.
but you lead me to
Yeah.
another question. So
Am I okay? Wait, am I okay, Rosita? I didn't want to be
Oh
too.
yeah, no,
no,
look, you actually said valid points.
no, absolutely.
I want to add to just to sum up what Shams, because you add valid points of the reality that many people don't want to talk about, or choose not to cross that line because they will lose their $500,000 salary and everything that comes with it. So does it exist in terms of this whole aspect? It does. With that being said, is that in terms of housing and homelessness and building and 80/20s and high tech buildings and what's affordable and what's everybody makes money off of it, but the real issue does not get resolved. With that being said, I just want to add something is that you go on not health on Housing Connect. You go on Housing Connect online. You will see all these beautiful buildings going up in
Hmm.
New York City, and then if you see the income bracket, and I did this about 2 weeks ago. I'm like, why are they asking for $180,000
In the
as
middle of the hood.
in the middle of the hood? But more than that, is like most of the people who need housing don't make $180,000. They're making 30, they're making 40,000. And so when I was looking at the income bracket, not only in Brooklyn, but out in Queens, I mean, it started at 100,000 for one person. So I'm like, hold on a minute. This is supposed to be affordable housing, right? For anybody that needs, to live based on the income that they can't afford the $10,000 rent, right? How is this still affordable when you're asking for 100,000 at a minimum for that particular building to live in? And like you said, Shams, it's like, they do have the tax credit. Developers do get this tax credit and everything. And again, it only allows certain individuals to live in those nice buildings that are considered affordable housing when the reality some of them start at 100,000 as a minimum income, and it screens out and rules out everyone else who really needs affordable housing, making that $30,000 $40,000, who are case managers, who are residential aides, who are contributing, giving back to their own community, have to work 3 4 jobs and still can't afford to live in a dignified place. So it says a lot about how the system is actually built and to whom it benefits the most when it comes to the financial means of that aspect. So just wanted to highlight that it's very complex how these buildings are, distribute, and the low tax income credit, and who benefits and who makes the money and who gets the credit of it. And that's a whole different other conversation, but want to point out that people really need to educate themselves of how that works, and to really see that that doesn't really is affordable for everyone, which is what Sham said.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's what Shan's brought up. Is it a racial, potentially a racial issue? Because like I've tried those housing connects years ago and living in New York, and it's like I I like just missed the cutoff
Mm-hmm.
of applying it. I'm like, I got myself, my kids, like try to move my dad in, and like we're like overqualified just based off even like a couple of thousand being over the limit, and it's just like I'm not it's like lower middle class person like trying to live in the city. Like it doesn't make any sense.
And these are the things that we have to contend with, and we have to, like I say, a lot of people in the advocacy space, they're not asking the right questions, or they don't have the right campaigns or pushes, because it's not really addressing the real elephant in the room. And if you're, that's why in the advocacy work, I take no money. I don't want no job, because I'm not going to be compromised. I want to be able to have a real respectful and honest conversation, and we can go from there, as opposed to, I'm scared to say this because I might not get the discretionary funds from this person, or I might not get the grant from this person. I want to be able to go into the spaces and keep it 100 with them and say, hey, look, I sense that there's some racial situation going on. And it's not what people think. It's not like, oh, this landlord's being racist, or this property owner's being racist, and this developer. Sure, we see that in those sectors. But I always say that the racism is codified. It's actually in the books. So, like I said, you're automatically disqualified for a voucher because you make $1,000 more than the cutoff limit, right? Try in these buildings in the hood you came up in. Try going on Housing Connect to get in that building, and it's telling you you need to make what, four times the amount, and four times your income, and you're like what? I automatically don't qualify,
Mm,
and a few set asides we're getting, if you decide, like some people might really be making a conscious decision to say, look, what's the use of me working this job for $30,000, right? Or let's say no, because that's a cutoff limit. Let's say, why would I take the $40,000 job knowing that I'm still going to be struggling, always on the brink of homelessness, right? I'm not going to take that job. I'm going to work part time, get the voucher, and survive like that, and
mm,
qualify for the building because they have 10 units for homeless, for formerly homeless people. I mean, it's just you got to say that, hey, it's not a question of the money. And look now, when they say, where is the money that we see the increase going to, is two things. I think it's three things, but it's two things I can say that they point out: homeless services and City Feb's vouchers. So the uproar now is, our current mayor said that in his campaigning, that he was going to institute the passage of the vouchers and stuff like that, right? He was going to implement it because it's already passed. But when they looked at it, and you're dealing with real fiscal people, they're saying, wait a minute, this is going to be a never ending thing, right? If the conversation gets a little more difficult, right? But now you have to also bring it to the conversation, as Christine Quinn points out, but the alternative of keeping people in shelters, because that's where they will be,
Mm-hmm.
is even more expensive. And what I think is missing from all of these conversations is the negative impact of the family, the
mm,
adults, single adults, and and family adult families, and the children who are rising, who are spending significant amount of times in these shelters. What we're not considering is the overall human impact, the trauma that comes from the shelter experience, whether you're living in a good one
Mm-hmm.
or a bad one. Just the fact of what a child has to go through, a senior has to go through, a woman has to go through, a male has to go through, a transgender, someone from the LGBT plus community, like all these different people that experience homelessness, whether in shelter or on the streets, like there is trauma that comes with that, and the longer that that person stays in that condition, the more of a negative impact that it has on that person's ability to live a long and balanced life. So it causes problems that extends way beyond someone's mayoral term, whether 4 years or 8 years. And
Mm-hmm.
if we're not factoring that human aspect, that's why I like to involve people with lived experience in the conversations, because sometimes you can only hear it from them. If you never experience it's kind of hard to process it. And I myself, I'm housed now. I like to still go in the streets. I like to still go in the shelters and talk to people that are going through it right now, because I can understand their current traumas, and I stay somewhat connected to that. But you have to understand it from the human cost that it takes. And there's a financial component too when someone is in the ER all the time, or someone is, stifling, going, they have the shelter, the prison pipeline. When all of those things are costing even more tax money. And so there has to be, like I've always pushed for, a declaration of emergency order, emergency declaration on housing and homelessness from the state and from the city, and being able to try and rally all resources. And we've seen little initiatives done in that regard, but I don't think enough has been done. And I think that one of the other things that hurts us is the divisions between all the different stakeholders. And I think we all have to come together. And those are hard conversations, but and sometimes they can get contentious. But if
Mm-hmm.
we can create a respectful environment to even have that hardcore engagement, I think we can produce better results if we're all working together to solve the issue.
I I want to go back that you touched on something a little bit, especially like apartments left vacant. I always think of COVID, the thousands of people who passed away, and then the thousands of people who left New York during pandemic. Myself and my wife are included in that statistic, and all these apartments that like were left vacant.
You
Like,
gotta be careful saying that online. Hoko and our and Mandani, they're gonna come get you. Say you gotta come back. We need them tax money.
but
I'm saying it too.
do
I'm not
do
gonna wait for them. I'm saying it too.
do do
Hey,
something
Rosita, we
productive.
gotta get some housing for back.
Do something productive so that I can come back because don't. I only come to see my social work friends and for a New York Liberty game. That's just, so I come to New York. So, but like some of like all those apartments, like what does the city have been doing with those apartments? Are they staying vacant, or like is it like a Puerto Rico situation that just like the houses of PR are just left vacant? Like what happened to those apartments?
So let me add to this, coming from more of like, the nonprofit sector and things like that. Each provider receives different type of governmental funding, whether it's from the federal HUD to state to the city. And yes, there's still thousands of units that are vacant, including in the supportive housing world. And so, as you know, like in supportive housing, you have to have a 2010E. There's a list of
Mm,
criteria, which again, I've always said, like, I do understand the rationale why you have to have a structure system and everything that comes with it, especially when it's allocated funds for individuals with disabilities or special pops. populations, but at the same time, it is a barrier for people to get immediately housed and get a home, right? Because it's a whole process. With that being said, every provider has a certain amount of time to fill in their vacancies. And what happens many times is that everybody wants that, and I've mentioned this before, um, is that everybody wants that perfect tenant, but what no one's perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect tenant or a client or anything that comes with it. And so a unit can be, instead of being 30 days offline, and if it includes like repairs and everything else that comes with it, right? It could take up to 6 months. It could even take up to a year. It just depends on the nature of each situation, which leads to the prior administration putting pressure in terms of getting people housed in all those vacancies because funding was then going to be at jeopardy, right? And then it was like, oh, we need to house individuals. And then it's like, we're not doing all this, like, aka cherry picking, right? We just need to house individuals. And many times, okay, like it's that level of housing that's needed, but also many times individuals need more support and need an appropriate level of setting. With that being said, is that there's still thousands of units vacant being warehoused at different capacities, and it's how are they being accounted for, and how are people, being, accountable to filling those vacancies is yet to be determined. Now, with a new administration, I do consider there's being put a little bit more of like, hey, the turnaround time and the expectation. But with that being said, is that the warehousing and the whole aspect of vacant units is still happening. It's still happening, and when you have a lot of people, about 100,000 plus in the shelter system with their valid 2010E, because after a certain period of time, that packet, which is a psychosocial, medical, your whole life on display, right, expires, and then the person has to go back again and do the whole paperwork, and that takes months in itself. So it's a whole like cycle, and I call it the hamster wheel where, well, if I don't get housing within this period of time that the 2010 packet is valid, you got to go through the process all over again because there's no extension. And with that being said, is that you have to go through an interviewing process to see if you meet the needs of that particular unit or program. And then lastly is like, am I going to be a good neighbor? And depending on the situation, you may have a roommate or not. It adds an extra level where this is why I said it could take up to years, which does happen in terms of coming out of the shelter system to get a permanent and safe home.
Yeah, I don't miss doing any of that work, especially those 2010s.
So you know what I'm talking about, right? It's a whole process in the system in CAPS, and it's a whole life story of someone in terms of the psychosocial, right? There's, the mental health, their social, their health,
Mm,
and then, you need to get evaluated by a psych. It's a whole list of slew of things from medical to psych and everything. And if you don't use that packet within the year of validation, you got to start all over again.
yeah.
But that's, to me, that speaks to a lot of the bureaucratic
Yeah,
issues,
yeah.
right? So I think one of the other things we had, and this is what you got to give to every administration, including the new administration. There's a time period that when you come in, because it's new people, it's, whether it's from the mayor or deputy mayors or commissioners, right? You have to give them time to actually study, you know, what's working, what's not working. And then you also have to give them time to come up with, well, what can we do to address these issues? So, I don't expect like to see major progress in even probably a first year of a term, right? Because a lot of that has to happen before then. Sometimes you have to test things out through a pilot to see if it works or if it doesn't work or where there need to be adjustments and stuff like that. So so it's challenging, but I do say that we have in previous administrations, we have been sort of caught up in so much bureaucracy, and the easier way to address it is to say just put some money into it, right? So
Hmm.
every year you see this quest for more money. But I think that when someone says that, you know what, I want a different approach. I actually want to solve this. So what we saw in Adams' administration was he could make an announcement, or we could make an announcement or suggestion. I'm talking about his deputy mayors, commissioners, someone like myself, or other advocates. And when he says, as the mayor, hey, that's a good idea. Let's do it. Hey, do it. The minute someone tries to do it, they realize they get a call from Albany, and it says, that's a violation of state law, or that's a violation of our policies that could affect the funding for this particular program, right? So it's now like, wait, what? And then legal in City Hall might say, yeah, actually, you can't do that. And you're like, wait, how is this on? This doesn't even make sense. It might be something like the 90-day rule, right? And then you now have to go and work with your state legislators or the governor to try and find a way of work around. Or sometimes it doesn't require a legislative change. It might require conversations with Oasis, conversations with OTDA, and stuff like that, because they've had these things baked in. And we start to say, especially those of us, because you're seeing a lot of people of color that are now in these spaces in city council, in the elect, in deputy mayors, commissioners, and so we kind of are in closer proximity to some of the issues, or on the ground with the people, so we kind of understand it a little more, and now we can push for these things, and that didn't happen in prior, going back several administrations, on the level that maybe it should have happened, or whatever the case is. And things change, so we're definitely in a different space post COVID, right? But you realize that now, there are things that have been done or situated that makes the process harder. So you have to identify that, and you have to have the political will, and even the financial will, to sort of like say, we have to make these changes, because that's the only way we're going to solve the problem that exists. Otherwise, yeah, it's easy to ask for more money and build another shelter, but sooner or later you're going to run out of spaces for shelters, because communities across the board uh, are saying, look, why are you building a shelter in my hood? I don't mind you building housing, but this is like the fourth shelter you built. Everywhere I turn, there's another shelter, or there's other conversations and stuff. So this to actually, like, to address, like we're saying, the vacancies. You have to look, and it's not, sometimes that's where the politics kind of mess these conversations up, instead of just being real with yourself, or real with New Yorkers, right? And saying, it's a problem in supportive housing, there are vacancies. It's a
Mhm.
problem in NYCHA, there are
Yeah.
vacancies. It's a problem with for-profit uh, property owners, there are
Yeah.
vacancies, right? Do It's not the same approach in each situation, maybe, right? But we have to address the vacancies across the board. And some
Yeah.
of the problems is rooted in bureaucracy, whether it be inspections, whether it be being advocating, or I'm sorry, allocating funds to make repairs, and then you have to balance that out. There's the argument, well, why would we make the repairs when this is a for-profit entity, right? Now, great, granted, if this is some entity that's bringing in billions of dollars, they might could make that them repairs themselves. But I looked across some of the portfolios of these property owners, and some of them are small,
Mhm.
5 units. I mean, sorry, not 5 units, 5 buildings, even 10 billion, 10 buildings. Some of them are minorities, many of them are minorities, immigrants that came here, and they're in that sector. But after wear and tear on the properties, and they're not receiving the incomes that they normally receive, whether rent stabilized, rent restricted, or whatever the case is, or post pandemic challenges, right? These people don't really have the money to do the repairs that are needed for the property. Now, people may say, well, it's for profit. Well, even the nonprofit can't do it. What's the
Right.
nonprofit?
Yeah.
NYCHA.
Mm.
So it's a legitimate argument. in some of these cases, and we have to be able to say, look, I've been a homeless advocate forever, so I that's it. Like, I fight for the homeless, right? I'm a housing, or I'm a tenant advocate, right? Yeah, hardcore. But we have to kind of like be able to open our minds to like see that other side of things, and say, where can we create a balance that is like, I'm not trying to enrich you guys, and you don't need it, but at the same time, I have to consider that, your parents came here from South America, 40 years ago. They started with one brownstone. Now they bought a tenement, and we're passing it on to generations to build generational wealth for our family. And we don't make a lot of money. In fact, in some of these properties, we have to sell it because we're now paying for it, and we're being hit with fines that we just can't pay, and there's no relief in sight. So these are things that have to be in the conversation, where we can
Mm,
have a balance of how to address it in a more proactive way and not a reactive way.
Mm. That's facts. And can I just add something, Baz? Which it's well,
yeah.
this is actually in the works with the new administration of taxing homeowners' property in New York City. Like everyone, like a certain amount of tax that they want to impose on property owners because of this deficit of trillions of dollars. And that's going to impact, like you mentioned, Shams, the black and brown communities, the individuals who came here 40, 50 years ago, or who are from New York, who bought a brownstone for 20 grand and then started buying smaller property. Like, that's going to impact our neighbors in terms of their homes and being displaced in the tax brackets to fill in the deficit gap and everything. So just wanted to hear that, because it's just like, now it's like holding Governor Hochul hostage of like, hey, if you don't tax the 1% or the people who make over $1 million or whatever it is, then us, the people, are going to get impacted, who've been living in the city, for many years, are going to be impacted if the 1% or whoever makes over $1 million doesn't get taxed. So I'm just wondering, like, in terms of that perspective, Shams, and also Baz, in terms of that, because again, it impacts us,
Mm,
the small homeowners who have passed their homes to their kids and so forth. They won't be able to pay all these taxes, and then be even more displaced, and having to be forced to sell their property and leave the city because of these taxes, because again, the whole tax bracket and everything that comes with it. I just want to note that, because again, that was not something that was mentioned, of taxing people who own their homes.
We tax the rich, right?
Yeah, tax the rich, but we're holding, the governor, hostage, that if you don't tax the rich, then we're going to tax us, the people. So, um, it's just like a tug of war in terms of like these type of things, when it shouldn't be that way. Just food for thought.
Yeah, Bash, you got anything on that?
I mean, I know as a homeowner, I would be very upset, being taxed, especially in the city already expensive as it is, and possibly like Rosita said, possibly may need to like sell my property and just leave the state altogether. No, that like you said earlier, you need my tax income to fund the services. So you're making me sell my property, so that's you're not going to get my tax dollars that you're going to need. So you're taxing regular folks who so happen to own property in the city, like taxing them. You're going to price them out, and they're forced to leave as well. I mean, they could get a king's ransom because New York is so expensive. They just move to a state that's cheaper, or they might leave the country. Period, and live their lives. So
And this is my critique of a lot of people in a lot of entities in the nonprofit sector, is because so many people spend time trying to maintain their organizations that they create a lobby that actually lobby for things that are just not going to end well for the people that they claim to serve. So um when the pressure comes to basically we got to address this issue by doing this, it becomes a political thing. We can't we can't negate the fact that there are lobbying groups or people lobbying for their interests. And so when they lobby for their interests and you have an elected official who says we're going to do this or we're going to do that, they might not be connected to the average person, say the average homeowner, who might give them a better perspective if they were connected to that person. So even and then there are people who are in administrations, not just this new administration, previous administration, who they see things through a lens that does not really reflect the reality of a person like you, Beth, a person like you, Rosita, or even a person like me, right? Because their life experience is different, right? They don't have to face the reality. They went to Harvard, Yale, Brown, or whatever, and they just don't process it the same way that we would. And some of the people that run these advocacy or nonprofit organizations have the same life experience as them, yet they're the ones leading the discussions on how to solve these problems that affect people like us, and not just say the person that's sleeping on the train right now, right? So it's like, the politics part of it can make things messy and actually cause more problems than it's tended to solve, right? And that's because you're not listening to people. Sometimes they don't listen to regular people. I think, one of the things we did with with the previous administration is, I think one of the assets, and that, some people, there's this anti-homeless, or sort of, I think it's racist a little bit, when they assume that a person like me, like, don't have the capacity to engage a high level city official, including a mayor, and give proper guidance, right? So it's like, don't let the mayor use you, or um you maybe you need our help when you go and have the conversation. But I counter with the fact that, and if you listen to the mayor, to the previous mayor, he says Shams more than anybody. Shams was on our neck. Shams, and there's more details to that maybe one day will come out to show how impactful I am in providing the proper guidance, even to the extent of saying to, let's say, the previous mayor, because he said that he'd been in shelters and they were cool. And I'm looking at him like, wait, what shelter you been in? Right? Like,
I know what
what are
shelter is
you
that,
talking about,
right?
right? Oh, I don't know about that, buddy. Right?
Yeah.
But what did I do? I took him to the shelters. I took him to the ones that I slept in. I walked the streets with him at night with no press. This is not on his press, whatever they schedule. So no one knows about this, right? Until it came out. But we went, so it's not announced, it's not prearranged, it's not set up or stayed. We popping up. And we pop up, and now we have to deal with the shelter staff. We have to deal with the shelter residents. We have to deal with the shelter conditions, because nobody knew we were going to pop up, right? We in the streets, which was a little weird for me, because first of all, I'm like, yo, where's your security? And he got like three people with him, and I'm saying, yo, my guy, we're in Harlem. It's late. Like, it's 12 o'clock. Yo, you the mayor. We can't be just walking around like that, right? And he's like, nah, we good. And I'm like, no. So I'm calling my homies, like, yo, get up. I need you out here, because, I can't have nothing happen while I'm walking with the mayor of New York City. But we out there like that. And we stopping and talking to people. And I'm bugging because the people's like, oh, yo, my bad, mayor. And he's like, nah, dude, I don't care about that. I'm like, yo, I hope they don't try to arrest this guy right now. He's trying to hide the pipe or whatever, right? And he's like, no, 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 it's all good. Do your thing. He's like this. He's like, you sure? you know, and he's like asking questions like, why are you out here? Like, what is it? You've been in a shelter. He's learning from them, right? The guy that's coming, and I'm like, yo, I could tell this guy probably, he gets it in, right? And the guy's like, yo, shoot, yo, you the mayor, yo, take a picture. Oh, shoot, I gotta send a picture to my girl. Having a real engagement with real people changes things. The shelter
Mm-hmm.
that he visited, he wasn't able to close that shelter, but he closed another shelter on Ward's Island. Right? We went to the migrants and went to the, I hate to use the term migrants. We went to our brothers and sisters that were sleeping in one of the big hurts. I think it was a hurt, and we spent the night with them and being able to engage them, not in a photo op thing. There's no news, nothing. No one knows about this prior. And I'm everyone knows because I'm the one who took a picture and put it out there. That wasn't his intention. His intention was really to find out how we can solve this. So I say that not to, it's not about if you're reading this as, oh, he's boosting up the mayor. No, no, no. It's not that. It's when a person like me or any advocate comes into the space, we should be telling those people, those elected officials, you need to come down and deal with real people. You're going to learn more from them than you would any of these people that y'all give all this money to. You will learn a lot from them. I tell my friends in the nonprofit sector, because when I say, what lived experience people did they talk to? They say, oh, nah, we talk to the ones in our shelter. I said, well, what the hell that got to do with the person that's in charge talking to you so you can articulate their views to them? Hell no. Bring them in the conversation. You should be there. You're the social worker, you're the policy person, you have the expertise to, and you should be there, but not without them. Let them come and speak for themselves. Trust me.
Mm-hmm.
You give them space because I'm the same one. Like, ain't nothing special about me, right? Let them talk. Let them engage themselves, and that person who may be disconnected has more of a connection now because they got it from the person that has that lived experience. And so those are just different things that sort of like help to sort of like change not just narrative, but also guide those people in leadership in a way that I believe has been more impactful. And I highlight when I'm referring to the previous administration, there is a reason why the data shows that we were able to come and announce wins and record number of things. There is a real reason for that that can be traced back to something, not just me, but I am a part of some of that. No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking. But listen, to be real, there were 50 other people, 30 to 50 people who engaged City Hall every month with lived experience of varying degrees, and their work and initiatives help to improve a lot as well.
All right. We could go on like all night talking talking
Yeah.
about
That's what
housing in New
I
York
think that's
City.
how it was the last time too.
We could go
but
on
but
and on
this is
talking about
but,
housing
but
and
this is a
the
great
fire mayor.
conversation, and the importance of like I said earlier, New York City makes the world go around, and for social workers or MSW students can come in to the field, that there's plenty of agencies doing good work, and there's a way to get your foot in the ground, and maybe you like it, work with a different population, or maybe you don't like it. There's different avenues within the housing system, housing programs you can get into. It's not just the shelter system. It's scattered site housing, or work with HIVs and doing home visits and all kind of things. So it's you know
One thing I want to just pose to you, Bath, if you do a quick thing, maybe between all three of us, where we speak to our thoughts on the first 100 days, if we want to, since this day marks that could be something. I think I think that might be something. If you what you think?
yeah. I can only go by from what my best friend does in New York, or what I see on social media. So I don't think I might have gone to New York City like once so far this calendar year. So Well, I see. I mean, he's trying. Like, there's a lot of things. Like we talked about. You know, De Blasio to me was this whole shit show. Other than the K to 3 and the K to 4 they did, I'm forever be grateful for him because I got my kid into pre-K
Yeah,
three,
yeah.
and I needed that at the time. But him being the public advocate, I felt he
He
could
would
have
have
done
done it.
more than what he did, and it was a total disaster. And then you got all that to say is just. Uh, it's still to be determined. Like you only could do so much in like the first 100 days, and that balance, with the governor and who's not very, popular to say the least. And so like, and she's running for reelection too. So that's going to depend on what he's able to do, whether she gets reelected or not. So time will tell. I mean, I did like the fact that he met with Mr. and Mrs. Met and took pictures at City Field with all like the behind the scenes workers and met like literally like one by one and shook their hands and took pictures. So at least that goes to your point of being like personable and like meeting folks and trying to meet them where they at and have conversations. So that I can say I like that about him.
Yeah.
Rosita.
Yeah, so I want to add to that. It's still early. It's only 100 days, right? I do agree with you, Baz, and also what you said, Shan. This is going on for years and years of past administrations. You were talking about Bloomberg to de
Mm-hmm.
Blasio to Adams to where we are now. We had COVID, we had a migrant crisis, we had Sandy. I mean, and everything else going on in the world, right? And now, we have a new president and everything that impacts that. So it's to be determined. He's very charismatic. When we were at Black Caucus, saw him how he engages the audience. He gets good reception and things like that. I really can't tell at this point because it's only 100 days in terms of a concrete plan of addressing, the unstably housed or homelessness and affordability. I really consider that there is a good intent. But again, this is not only one person, this is city council, just like you said. Baz, the governor's up for re-election, and there's a lot at stake right now. So it's really to be determined. At the end of the day, guess what? It's all of us that gets impacted by decision making or policy makings that we're not even part of the table. So I really hope that he includes more people of the community, including yourself, Shams, and others, to be part of these conversations and decision making too. So it's really right now is to be determined on a lot of things. I know I didn't answer your question, but like
No, no, you did. You
No,
did.
you did, you did.
That's an answer. 'Cause when you look at, they just did these polls, and there's different viewpoints, and there's a large segment of people who's like, it's 100 days. I can't really make any real judgment and stuff like that. My thing is, they be moving like gangsters. I ain't got nothing to say. I'm keeping my mouth shut. I don't want no smoke.
Yeah.
Awesome.
We probably meet him sooner than later, right around the corner. So let's see.
Well,
Like,
well, my position is, you know, I'm always here to help the city. I don't work for nobody. Nobody controls me, right? So I don't have nothing to lose, or and nothing really to gain other than seeing the city a better place for people. And so it doesn't matter who's in an office. My position is to really always help the city and help people. I go out once a month. I sleep in the streets to stay connected, to be in solidarity with people who are in there, to kind of understand what the challenges are in real time. And let me tell you, it gets worse every month for me. Like, it's not that simple, especially when it's cold, right? But there was a time when it was fun, but it's not fun no more, right? But it does allow me to understand what's going on. But I think the basic thing is that, you know, um, I think if it's anything, it's important to engage people that have real to be on the ground, engage people with real lived experience in a variety of things. What I saw with Mayor Adams is um, that you're not the mayor for shams. You got to be the mayor for the entire city. If a person is the mayor for just one person or one segment of the population, that's not the mayor for the city of New York. And there's New York is such a diverse place in a variety of ways, right?
Mm,
That you're not going to please everybody. So there has to be a balance. It's not a job that I would jump to. And hats off to anybody that does. But it's not a simple job as some people may think. Many of the issues that we discussed today, these are things that's been long standing, and
mhm,
to try and change it is like you're not like it's some things is executive order, but there's some executive orders that might be on a state level, it might be invalid because it's violating a state rule or a federal rule. So if you're trying to mitigate, wait, we can't do this executive order because we're going to run into problems with the state or the federal government, which provides the funding to do this. It's a lot, and then it's like conversations you got to have beyond, maybe your city council members and stuff. But I will say that, and what I will say is that um, I think that New York has the ability to run and to go in the right direction. I think that, I'm happy that Julie Menon is the speaker of the city council. I think she's already doing an excellent job. I think she's going to do an even more excellent job as time moves forward. There's always been a good amount of city council members. Most of your council body, I love them. I love their work. Many of them have been supporters of me, but beyond them supporting me, many of them represent us. They come from our community, so those are easier conversations than when you go far back. And in the administration, we're only 100 days in. So, like I said initially, people critique me for partnering with the Adams administration. But our partnership produced great results, historic record breaking results for the people who needed that help most, right? Um, but at the same time, I understood that the challenges, and I learned even more as the time passed, that is not simple. You have to give time to really study what's there. Another thing that's important, which I would hope that this new administration takes heed to, is having the right people surrounding you, because sometimes the old players jump into these environments and they try to guide you towards stuff that ain't never worked because they trying to hold on to what I call a legacy of failure, right? As a person been impacted by policies. Sometimes the worst thing you could tell me as a social worker, advocate, nonprofit, whoever, is I've been in this for 30 years. I'm like, oh, so you the problem. Because I've been homeless for over 40 years. And
mhm.
if my story, I don't even tell the trauma. And if I told you the trauma of what I went through before I became the homeless hero, it would make a brass monkey cry. So, what were you doing for 30 years that I had to experience that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We're gonna leave it there. No, on that note, a great conversation. Thank you both so much for coming on, and I hope those who listening take heed to this great conversation because the story continues.
See you
Thank you.
next administration or next year. Now I'm just joking.
There's around three with shams on that note, so it's to explore more. But thank you so much, Baz. Thank you again, Sham.
Absolutely.
Great conversation.
All right.